The grumpy old man.
Yeah,
very well.
Good.
Oh yeah.
We'll have to kind of like
look
a little bit
look like
some...
it's something's going on, like it's really all up there.
Here with more on the subject is our grumpy old man.
This is the Grumpy Old Man Podcast, hosted by Dave Mathwin. So close your yapper and just listen.
All right.
So we just start.
Yeah, I can clip up until.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to yet another episode of the Grumpy Old Man. You notice, ladies and gentlemen, that we are live and in person. Thanks to you, Jack. Welcome to the Grumpy Old Man.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're very welcome, and glad to do it. And thank you, Jack, for facilitating our first in-person Grumpy Old Man episode.
But of course.
You know, Jack, instead of like the normal 20 views, this one might get 40.
40, doubling. So we're going straight up.
We're going straight up to the top.
Okay.
All thanks to our lovely in-home studio.
Absolutely.
Well, Jack, you're a guest because you seem quite interested in running with the theme that we were starting to talk about in class regarding the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
So, to set the stage, I suppose, for our audience, I made the suggestion in class that the Industrial Revolution was, in some ways, a much greater revolution than the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, what have you. Perhaps the most significant change in human history. Because it was the most significant, never before have human beings, shall we say, added so much to their bodies. Okay, so that sounded kind of weird, and then I had to explain it a little bit.
That's fair. So I guess it's not necessarily like the physical body, but it's like the capabilities of something to do that you don't have to do with yourself. Like it's not physical labor.
Like a kind of extension,
right?
An extent, like a tools that extend the self. So
right.
So Genesis 1. And I know some people are like, oh goodness gracious, do we really have to? Yes. All right. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen, as we set the stage. So, Genesis 1, right, Genesis 2, Adam and Eve live, we don't see them, right, create extensions of themselves. They fall, right, and God gives them garments of skin. Now, a variety of Christian theologians have discussed the nature of this idea of garments of skin. And I certainly can't exhaust that for many, many, many reasons. But the basic idea is, right, that we now feel the need, we now have the need to cover ourselves, to add to ourselves in order to exist. And we see right away in Genesis 4 that it is Cain's descendants, right, that make walled cities, that make tools, implements, even, I think that we would count as a blessing, right? Musical instruments, right? What are musical instruments made of, at least back then, right? Usually horns or skins of dead animals. In other words, trying to get additional life by covering ourselves in more death.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Kind of. Excuse me. I think kind of going off that point about covering ourselves with something like, I guess you could say death. I mean, to go back to Genesis, even the snake, when he tempted Adam and Eve, he said, you will surely not die. When truly what it was the knowledge led to death. Because then they were like, oh, we're naked, we have to be covered, which led to the need of the death of something in order to be covered, in order to be fulfilling what you think you need. So really the knowledge, the enlightenment is what's death. And that's why I think it's kind of ironic that ultimately our knowledge is what leads to death. However, we're using along the way in order to prevent death or make life easier is required to bring more death, whether it's on an animal, something like that.
Well, right. I mean, in a sense, every form of eating, not even just eating meat, right, which obviously requires death of something sentient. But if you pick an apple from a tree, that apple, dies. It's severed from its source of life.
Right.
So this whole and then. So are tools wrong? No, I don't think that's what Genesis 4 is saying per se. It's not saying that it's wrong to make a shovel or, but I think we should recognize it for what it is. Now, human history has marched on. Well, C.S. Lewis made the comment. I think I mentioned this in class, right? That around, I believe it was 1954, when he was elected fellow to Cambridge. And I'm sure all the fact checkers will get on that and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was election to Cambridge. He made a speech in which he argued that Jane Austen, writing around the year 1800, had more in common with the world of Homer, writing, somewhere around 800 BC. So give or take, 2,500 years or more in the past, than we had in common with Jane Austen just 150 years, right? Basically, in that 150-year time span, Lewis saw this massive change in how we lived, how we related to creation, how we related to work, how we relate to each other, families, everything is going to change, and did change fundamentally. And you seem particularly taken by this idea of the dramatic amount of change, of the kinds of change that took place. Without saying again that we shouldn't live, that we shouldn't have pens.
Right, that we shouldn't live in the darkness.
That we shouldn't. But we never really think about our relationship to what's around us, I think, in an appropriately theological way. You seemed quite taken by this, and you wanted to run with certain strands of thought related to that. When we mentioned this in class, where did your mind go? Where were you running to?
Well, when you talked about, the relatability, I guess you could say, that Lewis noticed between, Jane Austen and Homer versus then Jane Austen and on, I think that's just interesting because, during the time of the Industrial Revolution, it seemed so just the thing of the week. It was normalized after a couple weeks. And then looking back, kind of like with COVID almost, where with COVID we're like, okay, we're wearing a mask this week, face shield next, lockdown, we're out. Things that seem normalized in the moment that when you look back, you're like, wow, that was a big change.
Right.
But this time last year, if someone told me to wear a mask in public, I'd probably look at them like there were lobsters coming out. It wouldn't make sense. So I think it's just kind of, I wouldn't say interesting, but just kind of interesting. How about that? Yeah, it is interesting how, humanity's adaptation to its environment. I'm not saying that, a physical adaptation or, a physical, change where it's like evolution, but I just mean like the mental adaptation and, overcoming of what you see, how something that as soon as it's in the flow of society, as soon as it's in use, it's normalized, and how over time, when you look at the little normalizations that have come in, brick by brick, when you look back, there's a whole building built. And you're like, well, how did this get here? It was just a brick yesterday, a wall the other day before, and last week it was this tall, So it's just the kind of stacking of civilization that seems drastic after time, but in the moment seems so just insignificant.
Right.
Which is why that kind of fascinates me,
Yeah. No, that's interesting, Jack, because I think you're right about the speed in which that can happen. So, of course, I graduated college in 1995, and I had some friends people on my dorm room or whatever, hall, were in computer science or electrical engineering or something like that, and they were talking about this thing, email. Like
email, you say?
Yeah, email. And I was like, yeah, whatever, you computer nerds, you do your thing,
Right.
And of course, 5 years later, everybody's on email. 5 years after that, everybody must have a computer. Now, like even the way I teach, the idea of me, when I started teaching, almost no one had computers, and our grade books were in these little green books, and now of course everything has to be it's right. you're right. The adjustment can happen very quickly. You know, the iPhone's introduced,
Right.
and it's a luxury item, and 5 years later, everybody basically, quote, has to have one. Cars, the same way.
Right.
It does seem that when you have this introduction of a new technology, that we do seem, it doesn't seem like we have much dominion over it. It seems to be very quickly we assimilate ourselves to it and make the necessary adjustments for good or ill. I guess in your lifetime, you didn't see some of those big switches.
I mean, the one I can really remember is like the iPhone, like you mentioned.
Okay, yeah. And so you were
8, maybe?
8 or so.
Wasn't it 2011 that the first one came out? Or
No,
it
I didn't
earlier
think it
than
was.
that?
I think it was earlier than that.
Really?
Was it 2007?
Oh, probably don't.
Maybe when it first came out, but maybe you might not like. They weren't really maybe mainstream until
Right.
I'm
That's fair.
just talking out my
Right.
whatever. I'm not really sure. So since then, though, I mean, what have you seen? Has there been a moment for your generation in terms of this technological adaptation?
I wouldn't necessarily say technological. I think there have been a couple things that have been kind of like, wow, what a fancy thing. That now it's like, oh, whatever.
Okay, so
what
what is it? What?
Well, I think one of those things could be like electric cars, or maybe Tesla for that option. You know, like maybe when they were first coming out, I'd see them online or I'd see pictures of them, and then if I saw one in real life, I'm like, wow, there's a Tesla. Now I'm like, oh, it's a Tesla. Like it's normalized now. I think one of the biggest ones has been, maybe not a physical thing like a new creation, but definitely more like a cultural shift. I remember when I was probably first introduced to the internet. I was homeschooled all my life, so it's not like it was this big, shock to me when I was young. But I used to watch a couple YouTube channels that my parents let me watch or something like that, and I remember thinking that, wow, these are really famous people that come out of nowhere and do this. And now I see kids my age, kids older than me, maybe even young adults saying, I'm going to make a career out of this. How it's just kind of like, so that's a thing. Now everyone's seen this, and now you're going to do that.
Right.
And how it's normalized. And how that's, like, if someone told me when I was young, I'm going to be a YouTuber, I'd probably laugh at them.
Right.
And now I'm like, I'd probably still laugh at them. But, people take that for a normal career. Just as something like whether you're an HVAC worker or you're a teacher or something like that, where it's a profession, which I think is interesting.
So might we consider then, I'm wondering, certain kinds of, well, this might require a very broad definition of a technology, but certain, we might say even cultural shifts as a kind of, because those have happened very quickly, with certain, beliefs. Last year in government class, we talked about how a political system was a kind of technology, a kind of tool.
Right, how is government a technology?
Right, yeah, a kind of tool that people use to organize themselves, make decisions, or what have you, a way to kind of mediate their experience in the world.
Right.
And I wonder then if it seems like, with certain physical technological changes that sometimes the tail is wagging the dog. Right. I wonder if it's maybe the same case with cultural changes. If the tail is wagging the dog, you might have a better eye on that than myself. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I personally, what I've seen and what I think is that, again, back to when I'm growing up. I'm 17. I feel like I'm saying back in my day, some sort of like.
So you're already enjoying saying it.
I love it. I can say that. I'm being an adult next year. But basically, what I've seen is kids grow up way faster. And I think that for a couple reasons. One, I had my first little bit of technology. I had that iPod. iPod was at a 4.
I have no idea.
Something like that.
It's like a 5. No, I don't know. It's just an iPod. It's not even a phone.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I had. I think
okay,
I got,
so it's
I got it when I was
let's call it a 4.
An iPod. I got an iPod when I was maybe, I don't want to say I was that old, maybe 11 or 12. So I was still young, could do virtually nothing, but it was my little piece of technology. And then that broke after a while, and I didn't get anything until I got a new iPhone, and I think I was 14 when I got an iPhone. And still, I think that's pretty young to get a phone. I don't think it's affected me too much. Then again,
Yeah.
how would I know?
How would you know?
But the
Yeah.
thing is, on many levels, I feel like kids are growing up way faster. I think one of the biggest ones is how they look at the opposite sex, like a big deal. Because I see kids that are like in middle school, talking about relationships and talking about oh, girls this, girls that, and not in like the way that you hear at the playground where they're like, oh, Susie's cute. It's like, I am dating Susie, and I'm like, you are 12. Like, this does not work like that. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I feel like I'm the boomer of a high schooler. Where I'm looking down, I'm like, what are you doing? But maybe that's just me.
Kids these days, am I right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the next episode. The youth of America.
Right. Join us, ladies and gentlemen, next time where Jack and I say, get off our lawn to
exactly.
lots of people.
with pipes and glasses and cans. But I just feel like a lot of that has to do with the media. Because I can definitely tell a change in how I view things and how I would think of different things in order to cultural references, societal references, things I've seen in the media, things I've seen on TV, YouTube, all these things that I wouldn't necessarily think about if I was removed from that. So when I was pretty much up until the time I got an iPod, when I was introduced to my own access to technology, I didn't have some sort of frame of reference besides my own reasoning, And I feel like what that does is you're connected to it, and you're pretty much at the mercy of what's on your phone. I mean, you can control it to some level, but at the end of the day, if you're on any kind of social media, you're going to see what it wants you to see. There's an algorithm. But I feel like the introduction of technology young is what grows kids up too fast.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course that has happened. Well, that's okay. So I wonder, when the Industrial Revolution just got going, there were no, like, for example, child labor laws. A lot of children were introduced to heavy machine technology quite young. I wonder if that would be interesting to study, like, has anybody ever studied the effects of that? I don't know.
I do have an article on that, actually.
Oh boy.
Absolutely. So the article literally was the physical effects.
Yes.
So what it was, so Mrs. Matherin and I were looking at it for my thesis topic. I don't know if I'm going to pursue it, but basically it said how the growth change in adults and children growing up in that time, how it actually made them smaller. It actually changed them over time, according to whatever it was, whether it was the use of machinery, which is actually kind of like, it's against what you'd think. Because if you're not doing the lifting, if you're not doing the pulling, the labor, you'd think that you would not have all that strain on your body.
Right, or maybe,
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
Right, sure, okay.
I still have the article somewhere, but it was just kind of how, over time, there was a significant shift in height. So I think that's kind of interesting. I'll have to show you that after.
Yeah, and I wonder with that physical shift, I wonder how that would play out in terms of mental, how did they process, how did they learn how to process information? How,
Right.
Yeah, that would be intriguing. I'd like to see this article.
Absolutely.
Something that we'll read maybe after Thanksgiving, or at least discuss, is the social theorist, a guy named Lewis Mumford. It's hard to pin down. What was he? Was he an historian? A kind of social critic,
Right.
whatever you want to call him. Made this distinction between essentially authoritarian technology and democratic technology, or what do you call it? It's called technics, but let's just say, for the sake of, let's just call it technology to make it a little easier. And he said there's certain things that are invented that our interaction with them, like they're not like, it's not like some kind of authoritarian dictator says, haha, I'm inventing X,
Right.
and this will enslave everyone. He said but the way we interact with it is inevitably authoritarian. In other words, it doesn't end up liberating the creative person. It ends up, in fact, narrowing and, shall we say, pigeonholing or cattle carring or, railroading people into a particular mold. In other words, our interaction with the technology ends up narrowing our experience. And one of, I think, the interesting debates or questions of our time is, shall we say, the phone, and is it, or democratic technology, I should say, like we say, like unleashes creative energy and shall we say, spreads people out, whereas the authoritarian technology like brings people, like narrows and boxes people in. Or at least that was how, he wasn't even terming it in terms of like authoritarian, political authoritarianism.
Right.
But although he said certainly those, it could be co-opted, or even like an authoritarian technology could lead towards authoritarian kind of regimes. We often, the cart can lead the horse, but
right.
In any case, the phone, I think, is a really interesting question on this. Be curious for your opinion. On the one hand, the phone liberates you, and allows you to look at anything, anywhere, at any time, listen to any music, anywhere, at any time. Watch any movie, more or less, right, anywhere, anytime.
Right.
But on the other hand, so you could say it's democratic in that sense. But if you take a look at what is actually happening, it appears that everybody is doing very much some of the same things.
Yeah.
So what is your perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I definitely can see both sides of what you mean by that, but I think that what you mean by expansion, especially when it has to do with smartphones, I feel like that just expands your ability. It doesn't expand what you actually do. And I feel like how it narrows people is it narrows people into a group. It's convenient. It's easy. It's entertaining. You're plugged into it. I think that the entire reason smartphones have become just overwhelmingly popular, unlike other technological advances, the Walkman. I'm kidding.
I remember Walkman.
Exactly.
I never had one though. That was a little bit outside my price range. But if you, oh my gosh, like you really couldn't actually hear anything. And you go back to some of those stuff. Anyway, go ahead, continue.
Well, now you have an iPod.
Now
so look at that.
Yeah.
But I think what it broadens or what it really expands is the ability or the possibilities, but I feel like it narrows reasoning and your own thinking. Like, to be honest, there are so many, like even with updates with your software on your phone, there are things that when the iPod came out, the software on that, a lot of things had to be done manually, whether you had to go home by pressing a button, or which now you don't even have to press a button, you swipe, so you're virtually eliminating a lot of the steps, which may seem like a small thing, but it leads to a brainless rut, if that makes sense. Because of the ease of access with technology and with the, I guess you could say, just smooth accessibility to the point where it's almost eliminating your reasoning and your I guess you'd say what you're trying to achieve with that technology. Because there's so many possibilities, you could achieve whatever, but because of the easiness, you fall into a rut because it's easy. So it's by theory supposed to be expanding, but really because there's so many possibilities, you fall into a rut. And because it's so easy, so I feel like it's like against what you think from it originally.
Okay. So like marketing studies have said, like, don't let. Oh, I was reading this one article about this, like, what was it? Oh yeah, it was this like high-end like jams and jellies store.
Jams and jellies. Oh.
Not a store that I think you or I would probably frequent very much.
Depends what kind of jams and jellies. I'm just saying.
In any case, they wanted to attract customers, obviously, and so they had like 30 jams and jellies out at the front, and did nothing for them. And they had a marketing consultant said it's like 30 is way too many. Show them
2 or 3.
Show them 3.
Give them the best options.
Yeah, give them just a few options.
Yeah.
Then you're going to see sales spike. And indeed, that's exactly what happened, right? So,
absolutely.
Right, you have so many options. you can't handle it, so you end up finding probably like the most comfortable ones. Yeah,
Right.
That's interesting.
I also think it's kind of intriguing how, like on your phone, how many applications there are and how few you use. There's probably 8 applications I use regularly on my phone, and there's probably like 40 something total, 3 of which I've probably installed. Pretty much just like Spotify, social media, and photos. Like that's
Right.
about it.
Right.
But there's all these extras that are included that no one really uses.
Yeah.
Like if you use widgets, you're kind of weird. But basically, what the point of that is that's what develops the rut. Because ultimately, you're a little overwhelmed by it.
Right.
Like I still don't even know what half those apps do. And I've had an iPhone for a while.
Right.
You know? And you develop the rut.
Yeah.
The expansion develops to the rut because of what you're comfortable with and what you know. It's that unknown territory, which is actually kind of funny how it's always expanding and you always want what's new. But as soon as something new happens, you still develop your rut.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's interesting. You know, I had never really considered that. That is a good point.
Well, that's why the Industrial Revolution kind of fascinates me, because I feel like throughout all of this, there have still been, I guess for lack of a better term, like common denominators in technology.
Great job bringing it back, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, like, in the Industrial Revolution, everything was new. It used to be manual labor, it used to be carts, it used to be horses. And now, you're turning into heavy machinery, you're turning into things, you know, the cotton gin, you know, different sorts of revolutionary devices that now it's like, wow, never thought of that, you know? And what's it like? That's why it's so fascinating, because it's constantly developing something new versus falling in the rut. Like with iPhones, every iPhone is more or less the same, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sorry if I offended you, but basically, the purpose, the usage, and the layout of it, pretty much the same.
Right.
If you look at the guts, which nobody does, and they're charging way more for, so it could all be a sham, to be honest. But if you look at it, it's all got the same purpose. The only thing different is the price tag, which is what we discussed in history the other day with the marketing, where what's new, how are you going to advance that?
Right, how are you going to keep on
Exactly.
multiplying?
And
Once everybody, like the low-hanging fruit of the first iPhone, but then once everybody has an iPhone, then how do you keep
Right.
the growth?
Let's change the charger. You know?
Right, let's change the charger,
Screw it
let's
up.
change something, yeah.
Right, and I also think that because the Industrial Revolution was constantly something new, that didn't build off each other, that's why it's kind of interesting. Because it's the new inventions and the new tools that you can create and use versus the building off of previously created tools. Which is why I'm just kind of like, so we're kind of more or less making the same thing here, but then it was a new thing, and a new thing not building off of one another, which is why it's interesting.
So, several years ago, I was at a conference, and I need to give credit where credit is due. The opening speaker, and this was Andrew Kern of the Xerxes Institute, so huzzah for you, sir. Anyway, made the statement that, one of the first things that the Industrial Revolution created was the industrial loom, something that could mechanically weave things. And there were a group of people, they were called the Luddites, that attempted to destroy these mechanical looms. They essentially armed rebellion against the machines, or of course the owners and proprietors and manufacturers of the machines and so on. A kind of early,
That's interesting.
Matrix, Terminator sort of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. Sort of Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah, exactly.
What, like 1850s or something like that?
Yeah. So, right.
It's probably way the wrong date, to be honest with you.
Well, actually, I'm not. I'm going blank at the moment. I better check on this. Yeah, fact checkers help us out. When did the Luddites do things? But for now, we'll just say 1850 sounds good. So, I think it was a little. Whatever. But he said, a lot of people will say, oh, they're attacking the looms because they don't want to lose their jobs. And he said, no. Actually, he thought something much more profound was going on. He said, what is happening is, even perhaps, it might have even been subconscious for them, but they are defending the idea of wisdom. And I thought to myself, what a crackpot idea that is. I mean, interesting idea, and I like interesting ideas, but come on, just insanity.
Right.
Come on. But then, he said, think of Penelope weaving right? To try and hold off the suitors. And Penelope, right, wisely trying to preserve her marriage. And I thought, well, all right, maybe, but okay, that's just one example. And then he went off, and it kind of went off into other things, but that kind of idea had stuck with me. And then, but I still thought, well, that's nuts. But then you look, and you don't see just Penelope weaving. You see, in Jason and the Argonauts.
Right.
You see, but it's okay.
I was gonna say.
In the story, right?
I think we shall.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. And we're back.
Yes.
So we were talking about Plato and weaving and the statesman and such, and then, Jack, here's the coup de grace. So, in other words, I began to see weaving. Weaving associated with wisdom all over the place in the ancient world. And then, coup de grace, when the angel Gabriel appears to Mary, what does ancient Christian tradition say that Mary was doing?
I'm going to say weaving.
You are correct, sir.
1 for 3. Look at that. You know what? Since I have the power, I might just cut that out. There you go. 1 for 3.
Weaving. And I thought, oh man, wow. Yeah, this right, as we, the more we add to ourselves, when we add power, yes, is there always an inverse relationship between adding power and losing wisdom? Probably not, but is there sometimes? There's got to be, it seems like sometimes, there must be.
I think going off of that point as well, I want to touch back to where we started in Genesis again. For something like this, about how they were upset. You know, what were they called again? Who? The angry villagers about the loom or something like that.
Oh, you mean the Luddites?
Yeah,
them.
Right, the Luddites. I feel like another reason for this rest that I could see looking from the outside is, you know, when there was the fall in the garden, there was also, you know, labor and hard work bestowed on Adam as a result of sin. And I think this relates quickly to something we can get into later about my kind of like, I wouldn't say theory, but, you know, view on like trying to play God. Because what we're given, a consequence of our actions as man, which was, you know, sinning in the garden, which resulted in labor, you know, sweat, work, things like that, that ultimately could be viewed as being trying to escape from that.
Yes.
Or something like that, because ultimately seceding from what you're burdened with or what you're given.
Right.
And playing God by trying to overcome and be greater. Not trying to better yourself, but be greater than what defines you and what holds you back like that. Which is something, probably not their reasoning, but something I could see looking at.
You know, that's interesting. You're right, of course, that, well, I think we could say, like, before the fall, like, Adam was to tend the garden. I mean, there was, I think, some sense of work, but obviously work is transformed after the fall and becomes less fruitful, right? More burdensome. And yes, are seeking to try and get back to paradise in a way, but not by, like Dante, right, has the pilgrim, before you go up, you have to go down. You have to kind of... You have to embrace, well, not brace, like, I love you, consequences of the fall, but you have to kind of go with that. Like, you have to understand that.
You know.
Right, and let that transform you.
Kind of like the crucible. Where
you're
being forged by fire and by trials, you know.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
what makes us human.
And you can't... There doesn't appear to be any other way to new life except via death, except perhaps if you're, you know, Enoch, you know, and are taken, you know, just taken. It seems to be a very rare sort of thing. Anyway, I don't know, I mentioned this in class, but the Werner Herzog's documentary on the internet called Lo and Behold, I thought it was definitely worth your time for any who may be interested.
What do you think? Leave a link down below to that? What do you think?
No.
Wow, a little interaction. I think we'll put that in.
Yeah,
bobbing and weaving. And speaking of weaving, hey, look at that. All right, I'll leave it down below. Down below. Lo and behold.
Lo and behold.
Lo and weave. That was stupid. that out.
Don't worry about it. Like I said, not too many viewers here.
Plus.
And we're back.
And we're back.
There's just one particular moment in the documentary that gave me like a kind of startling moment, like eyes bug out moment, and it was when it was some kind of company that was trying to invent a robot, right, to help elderly patients. And of course, it's good to help people who are elderly and infirm, right? But the idea then of creating like a human-looking robot that can do certain tasks, that can walk, that can pour water, and so forth. And what really kind of unnerved me, I must admit, was this one particular scene where they have a robot that is like coming out and like correctly pouring juice and so forth, and the hushed, almost reverence from the crowd,
Right.
and like they had just seen
Like a ghost or something.
or something glorious and magnificent. And I thought, oh my gosh, that seems
Not even cultic, but more like spiritual.
exactly
Right.
And I thought, why is it that we want to invent human-looking? Why do we wish to invent humanoids?
Right.
Okay, our dishwasher is a robot, right? I mean, we have to admit that. So Dave, are you saying like all robots are bad? No, I like the fact that I have a dishwasher. So what do I do with that? I don't know. But the human-looking robot
Right.
seems to be a passion of some. And
Almost
I
an
don't understand.
obsession, to be honest.
Yes.
And
And for what reason? There doesn't appear to be necessarily a reason. For example, I suppose the infirm patient, right? You could have like a water dispenser right nearby. Like he could just like press a button or something.
right.
hold the
So
cup
many
over-
easy solutions.
So many other solutions that it would be easier than a humanoid-looking robot. What do you think's going on there? So we both agree basically.
Right.
That
Yeah,
basically-
of course.
Okay, all right, go ahead. What do you think is going on there?
Allow me to formulate my thoughts. I think that the reason for this goes back to what we talked a little bit about Genesis and about what I feel like there's definitely a certain element to humanity that, even being mortal, is not really timeless, but holds us to being humans.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus died and rose from the grave, and that obviously separated him from humanity, quite obviously. But the things between death, between suffering, between, understanding eternity, things that humans can't comprehend or rebound from, that tie us down, try to be seceded by things we can control. Whether that be playing God, and I think that playing God takes many forms, but in this case, creating AI or some sort of like robotic figure, especially humanoids, is an obsession of many for a couple reasons. I feel like the first one is that, of course, convenience maybe. That could be something, even though, like we said, a simple machine does the job. I feel like it's a different kind of control. I feel like with a dishwasher, dishes are in, put in a tab, close it, it's done. Versus a humanoid robot, you program it, and you see it move as if a human does.
Right.
You say, wow, I made that to resemble a human, to do the work I as a human am supposed to do. I am more accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's an obsession. And I feel like it's a scary reality that it wants to become normalized. Because ultimately, all technology has really done is giving man something to harness, and giving man something to have power over and then utilize for a purpose. And I understand tools, but when you start utilizing humanoids for your own good, that's playing God, in my opinion. You're trying to create life,
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to command something, command a humanoid as if, you're playing God. You're the God of it.
And I wonder, and are you then trying to, exploit life? There's some interesting stuff. So, now I know you weren't here in 8th grade when we did some of this ancient world stuff, but in Babylonian mythology, like one of the themes that you see is that where you've got the higher gods, and they don't want to kind of do any work, and so they make the lesser gods do the work.
Exactly.
And then the lesser gods get, what do they call it, it's like IGGI or something, like the Igigi or something like that. I can't pronounce it. Fact checkers, help us out. But the lesser gods then are like, why should we do this? Like, let's get the humans to do the work, and we'll. So this kind of constant passing on of the burden of work down and down and down and down, and it's like one set of gods exploits a lower set of gods, and the lower set of gods exploit the humans.
I think it's fascinating.
Right, the humans hypothetically could exploit the animals. So this very prevalent idea of, obviously, to escape work, and then that the way to escape work is to exploit.
Well, I think that, first off, that's a really good point about how it's just bestowing. I think it's also kind of the dodginess of human nature. It's one of the first things Adam did when sin was, proclaimed. He was like, she made me do it, right. So I think that's another really good example of how when there's a challenge, it is a human instinct to either blame it or bestow it on something else.
Right. To kind of like push it down. It down.
Well, that also can come from a higher, not only viewing, but perspective of your role, Because if you're saying, oh, well, I don't deserve to do this, well, then who does? Does someone else have to do it because they're less than you? Does AI have to do it because it's created to do that? Like, we are created for a purpose, and we are created to accomplish something, at least in terms of what we have to do on Earth. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's interesting how a lot of that can come from a high view of yourself.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, I don't have to do that, I'll just push it down.
Yeah, I'd be curious. So I was listening to, this was a few months ago, I was listening to Robert Downey Jr., the actor, and all that. He's on the Joe Rogan podcast. Joe Rogan narrowly beating me out in terms of views.
Very narrow.
Just narrowly, though. I'm look out, Joe Rogan. I'm coming.
Yeah, exactly.
But Robert Downey Jr. was saying, I got into some conversation about his eyesight, and he was saying, well, yes, of course, look, he admitted, I got gobs of money. I could have surgery to repair my eyes, but it was interesting. He said, I don't want to do that. Something feels like I should just let my eyes go, and I should just get thicker glasses. And I don't want, now, other things he might pay for, but it was interesting that there was a part of himself that said, no, wait, I need to let myself deteriorate on some level if I'm going to be a normal human being.
Right.
And of course, I'm an actor, I'm rich, I'm not a normal human being in many respects. In this, it's good to be in touch with being a normal human being. I'm not going to laser surgery in my eyes. And I thought, good for you, Robert Downey Jr. Where cultures, as we've already said, they don't seem to know how to draw the line on technology. If a thing comes, we're initially like, what's that? And then we're like, interesting. And then we're like, must have it. And then we're like, don't even notice it. Because it's just part of the air we breathe.
It becomes so normalized.
How about yourself personally? Is there technology where you draw the line I'm tempted, but I'm not going to go there just for the sake of drawing some kind of line in the sand somewhere?
Nothing that has been perfectly developed yet. Mm-hmm. There have been things, tossing around ideas, listening to the Joe Rogan podcast on other things, about, possible human additions, things that could assist you, this crazy talk of, having your smartphone in your ear the entire time.
Right.
Things like that.
Google Glass.
Right, things like that. I think, personally, then again, I'm selfish. If there were bionic legs, goodbye legs. Here comes 6'5" Jack. I can squat a car and jump over a house. Give me that.
You would take a bionic leg. You couldn't resist.
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. See you in 50 years. But I think what really comes down to it for me is something that would alter my headspace.
Okay,
Because
I draw the line
there's-
in your brain.
Right.
Like direct brain, whatever.
Right. There's already enough things trying to assist me, and already enough, coincidences that I hate. Whether it's like I'll have my Amazon Echo in my house, and I'll be like, I could really use some wiffle balls or something like that. And then 2 days later, an ad for wiffle balls pops up. I'm like,
Right.
I hate you. Like that is a big pet peeve of mine. Probably not a fear.
Is that
Because
Alexa?
that thing. I
Oh.
always get paranoid when you say it's there. Like it's gonna wake up. I get paranoid about it.
So yeah, I won't. Yeah.
No,
But you
like
do have the Alexa.
my parents have the Alexa.
Ah.
I am very, very 1984 about it. I'm like, all right.
But do you ever like enjoy using it?
It depends.
Okay.
Honestly.
But okay. So when you get out and are you gonna have an Alexa?
No, absolutely.
So
not.
you draw the line.
I already
at
feel like my
Alexa.
phone's listening to me.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and I don't like that because first off, 1984 kind of gave me a view I can't unsee. But
Right.
I also feel like,
You're referring to the book 1980.
of course,
Yes,
great book, George Orwell. I just
Read as part of the Adventist curriculum.
exactly 11th grade curriculum. It was fantastic, annotated to the teeth. But
Right.
I just don't like. It's almost like, for example, when there's a grumpy old man or something like that in a nursing home, and there's a caretaker trying to assist him. He's like, no, I don't want, let me walk. It's like
Right.
you don't have legs, something like that. Where
Right.
it's the unwillingness or the distaste for assistance that could be perceived as helpful, but is ultimately pretty weird. Like for this, it could be convenient. If I said, I could really use some plastic spoons, and then I see an ad for plastic spoons, all I gotta do is click on it and I've got my plastic spoons instead of remember it, search it up, XYZ.
Right. Yeah.
While it could be helpful, my humanity, I guess you could say, or
Yeah.
my own personal privacy, I'm like, I don't want that. If I need it, I have the memory, I have the will, I have the way, and that's why I feel like, well, man can only do so much to the body, my mind is what I want to keep to myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. The body does have certain kinds of limitations, physical limitations. I mean, you can get stronger, but you can't get, like, shall we say, infinitely stronger. You can get faster, but not infinitely. But the brain is different. The brain and thought is so much more. It moves so much faster.
Right.
There's so much more we don't understand. Its capabilities are, the intellect has, I think, far, in a sense, greater capabilities than the body.
Right.
And in a sense, right, it's good that the intellect is in some ways reined in by the body. It kind of tamed or contained, like, we're body and soul and so forth. And, but, right, yes, this kind of direct, I think you're right to point out, to be very hesitant about kind of direct, because maybe it could give a little extra jolt to the synapses or create a few extra, pathways here or there, or reconnect. But yeah, right, like it might work tremendously, but I think yes, the cost there is.
Well, also,
far too high.
I can also understand the need for some sort of body altercation, because we understand the body. We've done research on pretty much everything that can be physically, but it's the mind. That's the thing. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I don't feel like that's what's needed. Pretty much the endlessness of consciousness and, the path of thought is something that I believe is a beautiful quality to the mind we're given, and it doesn't need a crutch.
I wonder, Jack, I just had a thought. I wonder so let's suppose that it's probably coming at some point, some kind of technology like this. I wonder if it will start as helping the elderly who are having, brain degeneration. This will help slow it or repair it or stop brain degeneration. And anybody who's lived with someone with Alzheimer's or something like that knows that it's a terrible thing to see.
Oh, absolutely.
But I wonder if that's where it will begin. And then, of course, you want to stop, but then it will have...
It will build on
probably,
itself.
Right, it will build and filter down. And so, right, I do think that, knowing where to draw the line,
Right.
ever since, well, it's something that civilization has always wrestled with. Like, like the church in the 14th century was very much against the crossbow, because warfare was here's my reasoning for why that was so, why I think that was, warfare happened, in the Middle Ages, whatever, but it was, generally speaking, controlled among an elite group of people that were highly trained. You had knights, and to fight as a knight required a lot of training.
A lot of skill.
A lot of skill that had to be developed over time, and it was controlled within a certain amount with a certain group, and not everybody could get entrance to that group. The crossbow is easy. Anybody. Right. Anybody can point and shoot. And it immediately, and the church was like, this will increase and spread violence. That's not good. But of course, it didn't work. Of course, the crossbow gets developed and other things and so on down the line.
I would definitely like to talk about this in another episode. I have a whole view on warfare. I personally believe that at a time, war was, I wouldn't say fair, but it was just. For a couple reasons. I don't justify violence, of course, but I do think there was a time, not necessarily a period in time, but an age in our technology that was developed and the weapons that we used, to where not only were the weapons unreliable enough, but they also weren't as dangerous as nearly anything we have today, to the point where it was a controlled, small environment where the odds of either doing damage or having damage done was so unlikely, even in war, whether that's having to do with blunt weapons or whether it's having to do with the inaccuracy of a musket, something like that, that ultimately leveled the playing field. Because now, we have bombs, we have guns, we have bullets that can shoot incredibly far, incredibly accurately, which, is convenient but also a curse. Because for our own protection, it's completely useful and I think necessary, but it's also available to everyone. So I do feel like there was a period in time that war was so difficult because of the tools you had that it was almost equal. Like it was almost fair because of the, not the unpredictability, but just the inaccuracy of everything. So, anyway.
Interesting thought. Okay, maybe a future episode.
Maybe.
Jack, I think we've hit on many good things. I appreciate you coming over. I appreciate doing this live.
Me too.
Much better than Zoom. And hopefully some of our future guests will be live right here at the Grumpy Old Man Studios. Jack Townsend, AFA Senior, thanks a lot.
Of course, thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion.
Thank you for listening to the Grumpy Old Man podcast. Be sure to come back for more episodes and to check out his companion blog, astickthemud.com.